Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Duke It Out Wrestling Podcast, where I, Duke, talk about events from the past, present, or future in the world of professional wrestling. Now, AEW Dynasty has just ended, or about in my time of making this podcast, about 10 to 15 minutes ago. So I figured I should make an immediate podcast to discuss my thoughts of the show. And I thought this was a fantastic pay-per-view from AEW. Not a single bad match on the card. There was a couple unfortunate events, one in particular when it comes to injury, which I'll get into a little bit later. But I thought the main card in particular was outstanding, pretty much from top to bottom. Awesome matches. In particular, I think three that are going to be solid match of the year candidates by the end of the year. So I'm going to go through every single match on the card. I'm pretty sure I've got everything in memory, but in case there's something that I wanted to mention and I was starting to forget, I got my handy dandy phone. So anyway, I will begin by talking about the 0 Hour, which I will briefly talk about it because my attention wasn't fully drawn, especially as compared to the main card, which I'm mainly wanting to get into. But it started with Alex Windsor against Marina Shafir, which Alex Windsor got the win, which was what I was predicting. I was thinking that Marina Shafir might have needed the win a little bit more, but it's still a great win for Windsor, and I thought Marina giving her the finger after the match was over was a really nice touch. And then after that was the return of Camille, which I thought was really cool. And then she got a post-match segment after quickly defeating a jobber with Willow Nightingale. And it's seeming like there could be the chance that Willow Nightingale could be losing the TBS championship to Camille pretty soon, which I would not be upset about because she had been off due to injury for quite a while. So for her to immediately come back and get a title win would be really awesome. And then the third match on the 0 Hour was Jack Perry versus Mark Davis, which got announced on Collision, so I didn't talk about it in my predictions video, but it was a pretty solid match. There was one sequence on the apron where it really seemed like Mark Davis killed Jack Perry, but Jack Perry did end up getting the win. And then the 0 Hour closed off with the women's tag team title match with Megan Bayne and Lena Cross defending their titles against Tyan and Maya World. And I thought it was a really solid match. It could have been that one might have been my favorite match of the entire 0 Hour, so definitely better that they saved it for last. But pretty predictably, Megan Bayne and Lena Cross did end up retaining the titles to close off the 0 Hour. And then we got to the main card, kicking it off with the Young Bucks against Kazuchika Okada and Konosuke Takeshita. And I thought, if I don't know if I said Konosuke twice. If I said Konosuke Okada, I'm pretty sure I said Kazuchika Okada, but if I did, I'm correcting that error there. But I thought this was a fucking fantastic opening match. This exceeded my expectations quite a bit, actually. And I already had pretty high expectations for this match. The ring work was outstanding. Consistent back and forth energy with some phenomenal sequences, whether it was a superplex German off the top rope, then leading to inverse Ranas, and then attempts to rainmakers and knees and super kicks. It was fucking amazing. I cannot say much better things about this opening match, not only from the ring work but from the storytelling, and that was exactly what I was really hoping for in this match. The only type of interference that we got was a little type of shenanigans from Don Callis, which was really funny, and the ring work was especially what was sold on the match, especially in the first half. There were some fantastic moments throughout. Nick Jackson's hot tag, where he kind of just backslide over to Takeshita to do a kick on Okada. It was one of the best sequences I've seen from Nick Jackson in quite a while. And he is already one of the best spot machines in the entire pro wrestling business. And that in particular was one of the many moments that stunned me throughout the match. And Okada brought some great comedy work in the first half. There was at one point where he put on one of the Young Bucks jackets, did the pose, and then went to the Young Bucks corner. When Matt turned around, he was just smiling, giving the finger with the gear on. It was hilarious, and some great comedy work from Okada. And then the storytelling portion of the match really kicked in during the second half, when at first there was teasing some tension with Okada and Takeshita starting to just beat up each other, when the Young Bucks had Okada and Takeshita in collective sharpshooters or just collective submissions. And then Okada and Takeshita started slapping each other in the face to make sure neither one would tap out. But then they just started just going back and forth and hitting forearms on each other. But then that led to them still getting an advantage for a slight moment. But then Takeshita accidentally hit Okada, and then Okada accidentally hit Takeshita. Then once it got to the closing part of the match, the Young Bucks were set up they hit the BTE trigger, and then they were setting up for the Meltzer driver. And then at first, Takeshita grabbed, I think it was Nick Jackson's ankle, could be wrong. He grabbed the ankle to stop him from hitting the Meltzer driver, but then looked at him, let go, backed off, and the crowd popped huge for that moment, which I loved. And then the Young Bucks got the win, pinning Okada. Takeshita really solidified his face turn here, and it was so wonderful to see, and it was exactly what I was hoping for in this match. And sometimes the predictable outcome is the exact right outcome, and this is one of those occasions. I was so ecstatic to finally see Takeshita just say fuck you to Okada, and maybe the entire Don Callis family. Pretty much seems that way. We'll see how it really goes on television. And it seems highly likely that this is going to lead to Okada versus Takeshita at Double or Nothing for the International Championship. And I cannot wait to get the proper singles match between the two. We already got the match at World's End in the C2, and it was awesome. But this is the real proper match that we're waiting for. And then the second match on the main card was Jericho versus Ricochet. Jericho's first match in AEW since last year's Dynasty when he lost the Ring of Honor World title against Bandito. I thought this was a lot better of a match than I expected it to be. I think it might have gotten a bit too much time because by the second half it was starting to get a tiny bit slower. But genuinely, the ring work was awesome throughout. Jericho did a really good job getting the crowd as energetic as possible, doing some more sports entertaining spots, grabbing the camera at one point to point at Ricochet and then just say, he's bald. And then, of course, since it's a Ricochet match, there's got to be spots where he slaps Ricochet in the head, in his bald head, and then he puts, when he has Ricochet in a submission, Jericho puts his long hair over Ricochet's hair and he's yelling, oh, he has hair. And that was very entertaining. But then once I got to the ring spots, there was some really awesome stuff. Ricochet, of course, showed off some great athleticism. One particular knee strike looked freaking awesome as hell from him. And then one of the probably my favorite spot of the entire match was when Ricochet got on the top rope attempting a shooting star press, and then Jericho ended up hitting a code breaker, which I thought was an amazingly executed spot. And another one of my favorite highlighted spots of the match, especially on Jericho's end, and another great reason to have his pay-per-view return in Canada. As soon as Jericho finally hit the Lion Salt, it was teased a couple times, and when he finally hit it, it was one of the biggest pops of the night. And it honestly made me smile quite a bit. It was really lovely to see that. And then by the time it was getting to the end of the match, I was predicting that Jericho was going to win, but the numbers game from the demand started to get a bit too much, and Ricochet ended up getting the win against Chris Jericho, which I thought was a really good decision. It doesn't tarnish Jericho's reputation in any way, shape, or form, and it's good to see Ricochet get a proper heel win on pay-per-view, especially because he was maybe a bit directionless since he had just recently lost the national championship, so it might have been difficult to see what would have been next for him. But I thought this win against Jericho was a really good decision, and the match turned out way better than I, or probably many others, expected it to be. And then the third match on the main card was Andrade El Idolo versus Darby Allin. If Darby wins, he gets a shot at the AEW World Championship. I thought this was a really brutal and awesome match. They went to swinging pretty quickly. They did some really great spots, kind of like letting Andrade's ego get the better of him on plenty of occasions, in particular when Andrade leaned against the ropes to do his pose, and then Darby just does a suicide dive right out there, and then in Andrade's typical spot, posing with a woman in the crowd, as soon as he's done taking the selfie and hands the woman back her sunglasses, Darby does a coffin drop to him on the outside. And there was a ton of brawling on the outside too, with Darby repeating that Samoa Joe dropkick spot on the stairs, which was horrifying. And I think he did it at All Out last year too. Darby's insane. But anyway, the match continued to get very brutal, with them doing many spots in and outside the ring that both looked brutal, like including a superplex from the apron to the floor. And they really just wanted to put their neck and back in as much jeopardy as humanly possible, which in pro wrestling cases leads to a very intense and awesome match. And of course, we got to the spot with Andrade ripping off his pants and showing the tights. And then he does one of my favorite spots that he does, doing the moonsault off the top rope, landing on his feet, and then doing it again. It's an amazing spot. And then Darby ends up getting the win with a great roll up. And Darby now is the number one contender for the AEW World Championship. And I was in my predictions video, I said that I was hoping that since Andrade was kind of questioning the ethics of Don Callis' decisions throughout the match, that if Darby won, Andrade would shake his hand, and that's exactly what happened, and that was really great to see, especially because it definitely teases a face turn for Andrade, so we could definitely see a lot more cracks being shown on the next few weeks on AEW television for the Don Callis family. And I saw a couple of tweets of some people acknowledging that Andrade might have looked a little bit too excited about that match, which was hilarious. But I'm really glad that Darby got the win. And later in a backstage segment, he would reveal to Renee Paquette that he would be choosing to have his All Elite Wrestling Championship match on Dynamite this upcoming Wednesday against whether it would have been MJF or Kenny Omega. But if you've watched the pay-per-view by now, then you know it's MJF. Sorry to spoil if you haven't. But if you haven't watched the pay-per-view yet, you knew what you were getting yourself into watching this fucking video. So it's on you. And then the fourth match on the card was the AEW Tag Team Championship match with FTR against Cage and Cope. I thought this was a really fun match. I think it was around the same levels as their match at All Out. Maybe a tiny bit better, maybe a tiny bit less. I think I would have to really rewatch it to really solidify my opinion. But regardless, I was there live for All Out, so there might be the biased opinion there. But I thought this was a really fun tag match. There was a lot of great teamwork spots from Cage and Cope in the beginning. FTR did some great heel work throughout. But things started to get a lot more worrisome when it got to a spot where Cash hits Adam Copeland in the face with the belt, and it seemed like the belt really got him for real. Either that or Cash was holding onto a blade in his hand, which I think is highly unlikely, but it clipped Copeland immediately, and as soon as the belt hit Copeland in the head, you could see blood pouring, and that was very concerning. But we still saw some awesome resilient spots from Copeland before it just became too much, and Dax was able to throw Christian on the outside of the ring, so they were able to pin Adam Copeland. And it's one of the few times that Copeland's been pinned. I know he's rarely been pinned on AEW television, and it might be the first time he's been pinned since, I believe, Malachi Black, but it could have been somebody else. But it had been a while, so it was really cool to see FTR tie up the feud here, and I'm pretty sure that this is going to lead to a ladder match between the teams at Double or Nothing, or maybe at a future event if Adam Copeland isn't concussed. I really hope he's okay after that, because even Stokely Hathaway was looking kind of sad a little bit when he was walking up the apron. So either he is really selling the hell out of what happened, or he was legitimately frightened. And I really hope that Stokely was just selling the shit out of it, because we know Stokely can sell a feud very, very well, and a match, and anything in pro wrestling, really. I really hope Stokely was just selling. And then we get to the TNT Championship Gauntlet match, which this is the one part where I'm going to make sure to pull out my handy dandy phone to make sure that I say every single contestant that appeared in this Gauntlet match, and I'm going to make sure it was in order of who entered. At first, the first two entrants were Tommaso Ciampa and Rush, and then we had Bandito, then Speedball Mike Bailey, then El Clone, and no hologram, which I was thinking might have happened, but no hologram. Pac, Daniel Garcia, Anthony Bowens, Kevin Knight, and Wheeler Yuta. And there were a lot of other people also thinking that Brody King was going to appear here. I was even suggesting it as well. We didn't see him tonight, but that doesn't mean that we can't see Brody King become TNT champion pretty soon. But I thought this was a really, really fun gauntlet match, and everyone got their time to shine here. And there was a lot of fun moments on social media talking about the match, especially people marking out a Pac being in tights again, which I thought was really funny. But there was one particular highlight of the match. It wasn't really anything ring-wise, but of course there's tons of ring highlights in this match. But when it got to a point when it was just Pac, Speedball Mike Bailey, and Bandito in the ring, I'm pretty sure. Yep, it was those three. When it was Speedball, Bandito. When it was Speedball, Bandito, and Pac, I was thinking, oh yeah, this is a dream triple threat match that we need to see. And it was getting really unpredictable throughout. And I think since we didn't get some surprise returns that that some people might have been expecting, it led to more unpredictability with the competitors that are actually in there and which ones could actually take it. Because I was guessing Tommaso Ciampa, but then the more the match was continuing, I'm like, okay, something inside of me is just feeling it's not going to go to Ciampa. And then I was leaning towards Speedball Mike Bailey, but it turns out it was Speedball's tag team partner, Kevin Knight, that would get his first singles championship win on AEW, which was a very cool and a bit of a shocking moment. I know some people were predicting it. I was more so guessing Speedball, but I am more than happy to see Kevin Knight become TNT champion. I thought it was an awesome surprise and an awesome sequence too, with Daniel Garcia really locking in the sharpshooter onto Speedball, and then Kevin Knight came in with the UFO splash and got the pin on Daniel Garcia. I thought it was an awesome moment, and they did a great camera shot looking at Speedball Mike Bailey, looking kind of conflicted. And so I'm really, really anxious to see what that leads to. And hopefully it is Kevin Knight versus Speedball Mike Bailey for the TNT title at Wembley, because that would be freaking awesome. But I guess we will have to wait and see. And the next match on the main card was Tekla against Jamie Hayter for the AEW Women's World Championship. And I thought this was a really good match. In most Jamie Hayter title matches, she does not care. She forgets that wrestling is an orchestrated sport and really went full forces on the strikes for real. And Tekla kind of did the same thing. There was plenty of times where I really thought that Tekla was legitimately knocking Jamie Hayter out. And it was a really good match. Suffered a bit from, I think this was one of the most predictable matches on the card. So maybe in that route, it became a bit less intense. But once the second half hit, it was really getting awesome. And then Tekla gets the win by doing a roll up and grabbing the rope, which she attempted to do to Chris Statlander, but failed at Revolution. This time, she was able to succeed at it. And then there was some fun post-match stuff afterward with Alex Windsor immediately running out and being like, hey, what the fuck? And then the Sisters Ascend coming to Tekla's aid. And literally, Jamie Hayter called her motherfucker. And so we're like, okay, I really hope we get more with this feud, or at the very least, a tag match between the teams on Dynamite or something like that. Because I would love to see more involvement with Jamie Hayter in the women's world title scene, because she hasn't held on to the title in almost 3 years, I believe, and that's just not right in my opinion. And next after that was Jon Moxley versus Will Ospreay for the Continental Championship, and this was a very brutal, intense, and amazingly worked match. Immediately kicking into full gear, not making a pun for another AEW pay-per-view, but Will Ospreay, as soon as the bell rang, immediately running in for the Hidden Blade, and then hitting the Hidden Blade a second time. it was such an electric moment from the crowd, and from me watching at home, I was like, holy fucking shit already, here we go. And then it immediately kind of reminded me of the 20-minute time limit stuff with Continental Classic matches, and so I'm like, oh, okay, here we go. This is going to try and get as intense as possible. But still, Ospreay was kind of teasing around a little bit and really taking his time. Then Moxley was starting to get the comebacks in, trying to get as brutal as he could possibly be, and then we were all in for the brutality. There was some fantastic near falls, some quick counters that I thought was especially amazing on Ospreay's part, and him selling the injured neck was absolutely amazing. Unless there were some occasions where he wasn't selling and was just legitimately hurt. Otherwise, ow! Because especially what would have been the ending sequence, the pile driver, one of the ending sequences, Moxley hitting the pile driver on the steel steps and Ospreay shaking was so intense. And then he brings him in the ring, hits him with 2 paradigm shifts. Ospreay still kicks out, which then made me think, are they actually going with Ospreay winning here? Because at first, if you watch my predictions podcast, I was predicting Moxley. But then as the match was going, and then as soon as that opening sequence happened, I'm like, could Ospreay just squash Mox immediately? Like, what are we doing here? What could happen? And then the more that Moxley was going after the neck, the more the realization was setting in. Oh yeah, he's not getting this. Even with Ospreay selling the resiliency so well, even when after Moxley hit the pile driver on the outside, getting back in the ring, he kind of grabbed at the ring banner and slipped on that to maybe think the count out would actually happen, and then he slides in. Really intense work, but Moxley did end up getting the win here. And I do wonder if they're going to take Ospreay out for another month or something after this to really sell how much Moxley fucked up his neck again. But we are going to have to wait and see. And I am curious onto how they're going to further book Mox. Now, more of a heel again, even though he was a face throughout the C2. I might make a whole video talking about my thoughts on Moxley and the Death Riders standing on whether they're face or heel, because it has been confusing me quite a bit. I can't lie. And then the second to last match on the main card, which was the most recently announced match on the main card, was excuse me, the Dogs versus the Conglomeration with Roderick Strong and Orange Cassidy and a mystery partner. And they did a really fun entrance with it kind of being like in the style of a sitcom, with there being a door and a couch with Orange sitting on it and Roddy walking in, and on the top there was an applause and laughter sign that was shown on the Titantron, which was really funny. And then it led to the return of Kyle O'Reilly, which, honest to God, is for sure the highlight of this entire match, because Kyle O'Reilly's back. We haven't seen Kyle O'Reilly since they were putting him over huge, having him beat Jon Moxley by submission at Full Gear last year, and then he unfortunately got injured, and we haven't seen him since. And now Kyle O'Reilly's back. It's so wonderful to see him back, and we got to see him in a really fun 6-man tag team match against the Dogs. But the one really unfortunate circumstance that happened, which I mentioned earlier, is that it seems like Gabe Kidd has dislocated his shoulder during the match. There was at a certain point where I saw that he was clutching his arm and the cameras were kind of hiding it, and I saw some fan footage of him being walked to the back. And it is such a damn shame, because Gabe Kidd is such an incredible wrestler. Over the past year, he has really been building himself to potentially be one of the top stars of AEW, while he had already been doing that in New Japan Pro Wrestling. So I really hope that this injury isn't too serious and Gabe Kidd can come back healthy as soon as possible. And then that could have potentially led to the shocking win of the Conglomeration getting the Trios Championships after the Dogs had only just won it on Collision, which was a shock to me, but also it could have definitely been because Gabe Kidd got injured. So they're trying to think of, okay, well, with it just being these two and the Dogs now, what could we really do? So they could have just made the decision there, or maybe it was their decision to have the Dogs lose. Who really knows? But especially because with Orange Cassidy's look after they won, he was like, what? In somewhat of a way that it could have just been him, just like, oh, it's him just like over exaggerating it and being like, oh, what? Or for a second, he was legitimately like, wait, we actually won? We weren't supposed to win. And then he has to kind of be like, oh, I got to really overreact it to make it seem like this is part of the bit. Okay, yeah, we were supposed to win. I'm not sure what the case was here, but regardless, I'm so happy to see Kyle O'Reilly back, but it is also such a bummer that it came at the circumstance at the same match where Gabe Kidd is taken out of action for who knows how long. And then we get to the main event, MJF versus Kenny Omega for the AEW World Championship, with some awesome entrances for both, with an awesome piano orchestration of Battle Cry in the beginning for Kenny's entrance, which was amazing. And then MJF's entrance gear in full devil getup was freaking awesome. And then the match itself was downright incredible. It really got its time. I think it was close to about 40 minutes, and there was fantastic work from all of them throughout. MJF really selling the cowardliness along with ring intelligence. Anytime he was hit with a big move, he would still be able to roll outside of the ring at just the right time before Kenny was going to attempt the pin. And also doing some amazing heel tactics at really going at the stomach of Kenny Omega and really bringing in the anger to that too, making the audience even more angry, which made it even more amazing. And Kenny brought out some awesome moments as per usual from him. Pretty much any aerial move to the outside was perfectly orchestrated, and any of his V triggers or just plain knee strikes looked absolutely brutal, which was awesome to witness. And the near falls were very, very close at certain points where I was thinking it was going to end, especially, or not even necessarily a near fall, like the moment when Kenny Omega hit the one-winged angel off the top rope and couldn't fully get ready to go for the pin. And once he was finally heading over there is when MJF rolled out of the ring. Some classic pro wrestling sequences there. And then we got to a bit of shenanigans in the end when MJF pulled the ref over to Kenny Omega for him to V-trigger the ref instead. So when Kenny hit the one-winged angel, the ref was not there to count to 3 until the ref was there to finally make the count, but it was a bit too late since Kenny had been sitting there with the pin attempt for already 10 to 15 seconds by that point. And then earlier in the match, they had set up a table outside the ring, which at first Kenny used hilariously to run off the apron and just stomp on the table while MJF was underneath it. And then they use the table, which at first Kenny Omega tries to hit the one-winged angel through it, and then MJF is able to catch him by grabbing the dynamite diamond ring out of the ref's pocket and hitting him in the gut with it, hitting the leaping tombstone through the table, and then hitting the heat seeker to get the win. MJF is still AEW World Champion, and because of that, he will be facing Darby Allin this Wednesday on Dynamite for the title. In my predictions video, I at first was guessing MJF, and at the last possible second, guessed Kenny Omega, just for the fact that if it's going to be Will Ospreay getting the world title match at All In, which I'm pretty sure he is, as long as he's not injured again, because he wanted to keep doing as many risky spots as he possibly could. A lot of landings on the neck there. But if that's still the case, I figured it would have been Kenny versus Will Ospreay, not MJF versus Will Ospreay 2. Not that I wouldn't be excited to see that match. I just figured they would have rather gone with Kenny and Ospreay 3. Not to say they can't still do that, but that's what I was thinking was going to be the case here. But when Darby did win, I was thinking, oh, okay, maybe it is going to be MJF, but they could still do a babyface versus babyface match with him and Kenny. So we'll see. But the devil is still on top, doing the devil horns and going back on his throne when the pay-per-view ended while he was sinking down through AEW's Cody Vader. But and speaking of Cody, MJF did also hit a crossroads, and the commentary didn't address it as a crossroads. So I do wonder if they're not allowed to call the crossroads anymore on commentary, or maybe that was just their own decision. I don't know. But anyway, that was my podcast talking about AEW Dynasty 2026. Like I mentioned earlier, I thought this was a fantastic pay-per-view. As per most AEW pay-per-views, it was very long. I think it was a bit shorter than Revolution, and if it wasn't, I think the pace did flow a little bit better. And I think there were a few more matches in here. I think the consistent flow of matches here I thought was a lot better than Revolution. Or not a lot better, just by a little bit. But anyway, please make sure to like this podcast, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications, and duke out your Dynasty opinions below in the comments.